Just checking for the live stream, making sure it's going okay. Yeah, it might lag a little bit. Audio working. Keep testing. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to go off of my watch, my clock that says it's 4:01. So let's get started. Welcome. Thanks for coming today. Maybe we'll have more people. I never know which size venue to get for this, because sometimes I'll have a lot of people and sometimes not so many. And because I'm teaching a large classroom this semester with 400 students filling this room, I decided to just get the same room in case all of them wanted to come, but clearly not all of them wanted to come. In fact, most of them are probably your students, Carl, anyway. So thanks for being here. I'm Dr. Heath Ogden, and I've been working here at UVU now. I'm in my 14th year, and I'm an evolutionary biologist, an entomologist, and a bioinformatician. And what else was I going to say? I've been doing this talk for, I try to do it every semester as a way to just give a venue for students who've been learning about evolution, learning about other science topics that perhaps are in conflict with their worldviews, and it's just a safe space where we can just have a nice chat. So what I like to do is kind of give a preamble, a little bit of an introduction to the topic so you can see where I'm coming at this from. And then what I would like to do is use most of our time as well, and I'll stay here as long as people want to ask questions, but I'll just open it up for questions at that point. So as we're going along, make sure and kind of jot down questions that you've always had, questions you want to ask, and this is a safe space, and you can, any question is available, you can ask whatever you want to ask, okay? So let me start off with, a little bit with my story. I was born and raised Latter-day Saint, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My dad was a business major at BYU. My mom did 2 years of an associate's, and then she was a stay-at-home mom for a long time, but she finally went back to the university at the age of 68 and graduated with her bachelor's degree. So yay for our mom. There I am holding her with my sister, and my other five, my siblings there are celebrating with her. I grew up in a house that I think most people would describe it as kind of a very fundamentalist, a very literalistic reading of the scriptures, a creationist house, where in relation to our topic, we're going to be discussing a lot about evolution. I would say that I grew up a creationist, someone who thought that God literally, in a very short period of time, created the world and all the things that are in the world, and that the world was very young, no more than 10,000 years old. Okay, so that was my growing up experience. I went on a mission to Chile, and when I came back, I finished up my bachelor's degree in zoology at BYU. I thought I was going to become a medical doctor like every other undergraduate at BYU. And then I went on a trip back to Chile to visit people I had met, and I met my wife, and I fell in love with my wife. And so I finished my bachelor's degree, married my wife, and moved to Chile for 4 years and did a master's degree in zoology while in Chile. And so that's kind of started me on my trajectory to become an academic professor instead of a medical doctor. And so then after we were there for a few years, we came back to Utah. I did my PhD in biology at BYU with an emphasis in evolution. So clearly by this point, you can imagine my worldview has been changing quite a bit. And happy to talk more about that, but essentially by this point, I'm now completely accepting the notion of evolution, a very old Earth, and even human evolution at this point. So I currently have only one wife. That's supposed to be a better joke here, but didn't go off so well. I have 4 kids. One's a BYU student, one is on a mission, and one is in high school, and the other one's in middle school. And I'm also currently serving in my ward as the bishop. I serve in a Spanish ward, and I'm the bishop right now. I've been the bishop for more than 5 years, so probably should be released here pretty soon, but who knows? We'll see. So the way I like to couch my way of looking at the world is in 5 principles, okay? 5 main principles. My first principle is this. I think that I only have to accept truth and knowledge, and that's it. And I don't care from where it comes. I don't care if it comes from scripture. I don't care if it comes from inspiration. I don't care if it comes from a fossil or a DNA sequence. I'm just interested in accepting truth. Or if you want to think of it, I'm just interested in accepting good ideas. And if there's bad ideas, I want to get rid of them. Okay? So that feels like a non-threatening way that I think most of us probably would agree with kind of that principle. Like, let's just find truth. That's why you're university students. You're here trying to figure out your own pathway towards truth and good ideas. Thomas Aquinas said, faith accepts divine truth as it is, whatever its source. And then the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints just said, just a few weeks ago, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints embraces all truth that God conveys to his children, whether learned in a scientific laboratory or received by direct revelation from him. So both of those seem to align pretty much with what my first principle is of accepting truth and knowledge. Now the problem is that sometimes you get conflict in worldviews. So for example, you might have accurate religious knowledge that is in conflict with inaccurate science. You could have the alternative of inaccurate religion in conflict with accurate science, and you could have inaccurate religion with inaccurate science. Now, what's the other option that I'm missing? Accurate religion and accurate science. In my worldview, those should converge to be the same truth. All truths should be circumscribed into one great whole. But I recognize that may not, there might even be conflict even when you think you've got truth there. But I think most of the conflict that exists are these 3 situations. Okay? That's where I think most conflict exists. Another quote from President Nelson, he said, "There's no conflict between science and religion." He said, "Conflict only arises from an incomplete knowledge of either science or religion or both." So basically, the 3 scenarios I just presented. Whether truth comes from a scientific laboratory or by revelation from the Lord, it is compatible, okay, or should be compatible at least. Now, because of this, I argue that a lot of times when we see conflict, it's because we have had a misunderstanding of our own religious doctrines or of our scientific knowledge. That's usually the problem, okay? And so this requires humility on all of our parts. It requires humility from theologians, and it requires humility from scientists, recognizing that we can be wrong and that there might be a better truth out there. Elder Ruchdorf even said, to be perfectly frank, there have been times when members or leaders in the church have simply made mistakes. There have been many things said or done that were not in harmony with our values, principles, or doctrine. So it doesn't matter if someone brings up some old quote to me from Joseph Fielding Smith that says, evolution is evil. And Joseph Fielding Smith said it. I could say, well, he could be wrong, right? Like, I have no problem with people being wrong. I'm wrong all the time. So I don't care if people are wrong. That's okay. We can make mistakes and be wrong, but we should be humble enough to accept that we made a mistake or that we were wrong and then just move forward in the search of better truth, of better knowledge. Okay? For example, many people, not a lot, but there are people that think that the earth is flat. You guys know this? I don't know if we have a flat earther in this room. Maybe we do. I don't know. Okay? And you might even say, well, what about the picture? And they could go, well, yeah, look at this picture. Doesn't that look flat? Well, yeah, if you only take a small bit of cherry-picked evidence, you might be able to prove anything or to show anything, right? Not prove it, but show it. Yeah, that kind of looks flat, but that's a really bad way to look at a picture of Earth. Probably ought to zoom out a little bit, right? And then it doesn't look so flat. It looks much more rounded, much more spherical. And I'm not going to go through all of the other evidence, but if you go through the amount of evidence, independent lines of evidence continuously converge on the same solution: the Earth is spherical. Okay? But flat earthers still exist because they cherry pick their own little tiny pieces of data to support their opinion, to support their view. Okay, now I'm choosing this example because it's kind of obvious. I think most of us are like, duh, the Earth is round. But this kind of thinking can be applied to any situation because it's essentially where you have to make a choice. Are you going to accept all the evidence to inform your worldview and your choices, or are you only going to choose some evidences as acceptable information that aligns with your preconceived worldview? Are you going to believe that Bigfoot is real because a few bits of data points kind of align with that thinking? Or are you going to say, well, I'm going to look at all of the possible evidences and all the possible hypotheses, and then I'm going to go, oh, it looks like there's actually not evidence for Bigfoot, et cetera, et cetera. I could keep going, right, on example after example, but I like just couching it in the terms of flat Earth because there are flat earthers. There's a society, they have an annual meeting, and hundreds of people go to this, okay? I'm not going to belabor the point on this, but there's just other leaders as well in the LDS tradition that have said basically, let's just accept truth. It doesn't matter where it comes from, okay? Let it come from whence it may. Brigham Young, our religion will not clash with or contradict the facts of science in any particular. So there's a bunch of examples of this. John Taylor said, we are open to truth of every kind, no matter whence it comes, where it originates, or who believes in it. Even James Talmage, who was a scientist and an apostle and an educator, said, within the gospel of Jesus Christ, there is room and place for every truth thus far learned by man or yet to be made known. So I think, especially in the LDS tradition, we need to be a little more humble that we don't know everything and that we can learn things from science and from other ways of knowing. We don't have to get every single truth through a general conference talk. Okay? We can get truth in lots of different ways. One of my heroes is Charles Darwin. As many of you know, I have kind of an unhealthy man crush on him. But he said, we can allow satellites, planets, suns, the universe, nay, whole systems of the universe to be governed by laws, but the smallest insect we wish to be created at once by special act. Now he's responding to the idea that many years previous to Darwin, one of the leading ideas of how the sun went across the sky was by a god with a chariot, right? And he would pull the sun across the sky. Well, obviously, once we did enough research, scientific endeavor on this, once Galileo came along and others, we were able to study the solar system and the universe and say, oh, no, wait. The sun is stationary relative to our solar system, and the Earth is moving around the sun, right? And we were able to figure this out. Now, that didn't mean that you had to end all religion. It just meant that the ideas of how you explain that natural phenomena was incorrect. And so you have to readjust your worldview. And the same could be said about evolution nowadays. And that's what Darwin was trying to argue. He's like, evolution is just the natural explanation of how things came to be on this planet. Okay, so that's my first principle. How's that sound? Good? if I had clickers, we could all say, do we agree or not agree with that? But we don't have that. My second principle is this. I do not believe in a God that is a deceiver or a cheater. I think he understands and lives in perfect harmony with natural laws. Okay? Now, on this planet, there are lots of entities that spend a lot of time trying to catch cheaters. Here are two examples. One on the top are like, this used to be a big deal, encyclopedias. You guys remember those things called encyclopedias? Now we have Wikipedia. But encyclopedias used to, on purpose, put false entries in their books, because then that way, if there's someone who's just copying, they're going to copy that false entry, and that's foolproof evidence in a court of law that someone copied your copyrighted material. Another entity that does this are map makers. They do this all the time, where they'll include towns or rivers or things that don't exist on a map. And they do that because then if someone copies their map, that's foolproof evidence of cheating or copying, right, in a court of law. In nature, many organisms have a biological pathway to go from glucose to ascorbic acid. Okay, and ascorbic acid or vitamin C is really important for lots of things. If you don't have it, you can get scurvy and other diseases, right? So one way to offset that is to eat fruits and vegetables. And it turns out that our common ancestor with the rest of the monkeys and the great apes lost the ability to create ascorbic acid because one of these genes was mutated in a way that the protein, the enzyme, no longer had the correct shape and therefore couldn't do its function that it's supposed to do. And that usually is like a branch killer in evolution. If you lose a pathway that's really important, that's not a good thing. Natural selection sees that and wipes that away. But in this case, all of the monkeys and apes and man, the ancestor back here, had the ability to recognize which fruits were ripe and go and eat them and get enough vitamin C in their diets, that it didn't matter that this pathway became broken. And when you look at the genes, the DNA sequence for that gene that is part of that pathway, this gulo gene, you see that there are mutations in the exact same position in the same gene in all of the organisms, this deletion, for example. Now, if evolution created it, if these organisms came about through evolution, it makes perfect sense. The common ancestor had that deletion, and that was carried through in all of the ancestors of this common, or all of the descendants of this common ancestor. However, if you accept the notion that every single species was created individually, right, or by themselves, not from evolution, then you would have to assume that the creator, the designer, also put in a gene that's broken, and not only put in a gene that's broken, but a gene that's broken in the exact same way in every single organism. Well, why would a designer do that? Unless you're trying to really deceive people that it looks to make them think that it's evolution, right? It's like, I just can't imagine that a God would do that. It just doesn't make sense to me. Another real quick example that I've looked at with my students already. This is a karyotype for humans. And it turns out that humans have 46 chromosomes and the rest of the great apes only have 48. So what happened along that branch? Well, when we look at a karyotype for all of the great apes, it turns out that right here in chromosome number 2, we see humans have, can you guys see my mouse? Okay, here we go. Right here in chromosome number 2, humans have a long chromosome, number 2, whereas the rest of the great apes have 2 short chromosomes that coincide in the exact same genes in the exact same order as long chromosome number 2 of humans. So it's as if 2 short chromosomes were pasted together. Okay, we call that fused together. Okay? That's what it looks like. Now, I guess a designer could have done that, but why would you do that? Because that's really an evidence for evolution. This is an evidence of evolution, not an evidence against evolution, right? So it's as if these 2 smaller chromosomes were pasted together because they have the same genes in the same order, right? And that's how you explain we only have 46 and the rest of the great apes have 48. So again, why would you do that? Another example. Where do you guys think this is from? This human evolution tree. What? Speak loud, someone.
It looks like BYU.
It is BYU. This is the Lord's University Natural History Museum, supposedly, right? And they have a human evolution exhibit. If you're going to be a biology major or many other majors, you are required to take evolutionary biology. It is a requirement. It's a required course. And it's taught by some really great evolutionary biologists who are my colleagues, and they teach it just like I teach my evolution course here at UVU. In fact, when I was a PhD student at BYU, I taught this course. I taught the evolution course. Okay? So once again, if evolution were really false, and God did it all, just, you know, kind of magic wandy, just kind of creating things independently, why would he put all of the evidences to make it look like it was evolution? Why would he require his children to go to his university? I'm being facetious here, but why would he require that? Why wouldn't he tell the apostles, hey, don't be teaching evolution, that's false. Don't be teaching that, don't require that of your students. So I can't go down the pathway that God is just this huge deceiver, that he's testing us in this weird way. That just doesn't make sense to me. Okay? I can't believe in a God that would do that. It just doesn't seem like the God that I believe in. So that's my second principle. Okay? I don't think God is a cheater or a deceiver. My last three principles are really just more personal things. I think my goal should be to strengthen my relationship with God, with Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. I think my goal should be to strengthen my relationship with my family and with others, and that includes treating everyone non-judgmentally. Everyone is a human being. We're all just Africans that came out of Africa. We're all the same. And there is diversity in these human beings. We're all diverse. And so we should treat everyone with respect, without judgment, and with mercy. And so I try to live my life, and I try to be a bishop in that way as well. Okay? And then number 5, I believe there is value in making and keeping covenants. I think there's something special about doing that. And that's it. The rest of the nuances of the church don't matter that much to me. This is really what matters to me as a believer, as a scientist and as a believer. These are my 5 principles. Okay? Now, I want to also address this issue of doctrine, because this is where we see that conflict start to happen. So talk to me, let's have a quick discussion. What is it that makes something an official doctrine? Or how does something become an official doctrine? You know, in this, I'm kind of couching this in terms of Mormonism and LDS, but this, I could have this exact same discussion if I were a Catholic or if I were a Jew or a Muslim. We could have this kind of same kind of discussion. How does something become a doctrine? Let's just use the LDS Church for now. How does something become a doctrine in the LDS Church? Or what is doctrine? Or what? Talk to me. Give me some ideas. Yeah.
What I understand, doctrine is the apostles declare it, or when the leaders of the church declare it to be so. Doctrine, that is not to say that when one specific church leader says one thing, it's doctrine. It's the constant repetition of the same principle through all churches.
Okay, interesting. So the idea of repetition of church leaders, and that any one church leader might get something wrong. Okay, good. Any other ideas? Yeah. Standard works. And why do we call them doctrine? What's another word that we use to say this? The canon, because they're canonized. What does that mean to be canonized in our church? And in many churches, but in our church. Not just that. What does it mean when something is canonized?
Accepted as true word of God.
It's accepted by whom? By the vote of the entire membership of the church. They put it up and they say, we think that this should be part of our canon. All in favor, and you can vote for it or not. That's kind of the highest level of acceptance in our church, I believe, too. Was there another hand somewhere that had an idea? Right. But how do you know whether it's a doctrine or whether an opinion or whether, or not even that? Well, how do we know if something's an official position or not? Okay.
Like, I remember a few years ago, the Pope changed, modified slightly, modified slightly the Lord's Prayer. And be more accurate with the original. He made an official declaration.
And does an official position have to be an eternal doctrine? Is it the position of the church that you can light candles inside of the church? You cannot. Okay, go to the church manual of Handbook of Instructions, go to the activities section, you'll see, no, you don't get to light fires inside the church. Now, I don't know that that's an eternal doctrine, because in Catholic churches, they light candles all the time. In fact, it's one of the things you're supposed to do, right? I think you can go in and you light a candle. So there are differences between official positions, official doctrines, right? These programs, all of this. How do we figure all of this out? It's not simple. But the highest level is when something is canonized. And so here's a short history of those canonizations. 1830, Bible and Book of Mormon were officially accepted. 1835, Doctrine and Covenants. 1880, Doctrine and Covenants, additional 32 sections. 1890, polygamy was repealed, right? That's the official declaration, one. 1976, D&Cs 137 and 138 were finally accepted. 1978, priesthood was made available to all worthy males, and temple work made available to all worthy people, right? Of color, didn't matter. 1921, the church removed some stuff. They removed the lectures of faith. So canonization, things can be canonized and uncanonized too throughout the years. So that kind of also calls into question the whole idea of canonization, right? It's like, oh, well, it was, but then it's not. And so it's complicated is what I'm trying to get you guys to see. How official something is or how unofficial something is complicated. And I'm not saying this is perfect. I'm just saying these are kind of the ways that maybe we think about some things that are more official and some things that are less official. Does that kind of make sense? Right? Like, I definitely think that just a book that you go pick up from Deseret Book, right, written, even if it was written by like a 70 or something, they're probably not writing the ultimate church doctrine. They're writing a book and they're writing some good stuff in there. Usually it's just re-quoting other people. But not a lot of theologian thinking going on. But nonetheless, there's things that are more official and things that are less official, right? So what is the official position of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on the theory of evolution and the origin of man?
I think the official position is the church says that it doesn't take a position and that the important thing is to point people towards Jesus Christ.
Yes, that's correct. Did you guys hear what he said? He said, I think the official position is that there is no official position. That's correct. And this is true for lots of things, but I don't think that the church necessarily has to come out and have an official. I mean, they don't have an official position on gravity or cell theory or germ theory or plate tectonics, right? Like, the church has never come out and said, we agree with plate tectonics. It is a true principle. Like, they don't. So I'm not saying the church has to have an official position. However, given the amount of conflict that human evolution has caused in many of us, including myself, I wish they did have an official position. And I wish they would go to the experts and figure out what would be the best way to do that. And they have a motive, they have a mechanism, right? They have these new essays, right? The topics essays, and they could easily do that. But so far, they haven't gone that far to do that. The furthest that they've gone, I'll give you 3 examples of this. The first one happened when I was an undergrad at BYU. In 1992, they did the Byu Evolution Packet. And this is because you would go to your Old Testament and Pearl of Great Price class and hear all the anti-evolution stuff and quotes from the anti-evolution prophets and apostles. Then you'd go over to your biology class and you'd get all the pro-evolution and pro-science stuff, and you were utterly confused about who you're supposed to be listening to. So the church and BYU said, let's make a packet. And they made a committee. The committee sent up a bunch of different texts and said, should these statements be included? And at the end, they threw out a bunch of statements, and the only ones they included were these 5 or 4. What do you notice about those 4 statements? What's in common? First presidency. They threw out even stuff that was a statement from a prophet when he was the prophet. That was interesting. The only things they kept were statements from first presidencies, when it was like an official declaration. And in fact, this last one wasn't even an official declaration. It was from their minutes in their own meeting. But the person who put together the Encyclopedia of Mormonism went and said, how about if we include this statement from the minutes as well? Because it's really, really good. And they're like, okay, you can include that. So that's it. Now, real quick, just on some of these, the 1931 statement said this: the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, basing itself on divine revelation, ancient modern, declares man to be the direct and lineal offspring of God. Man is a child of God. Right? Upon these fundamental truths, let science do what science does, and we'll do what we do. I mean, that's kind of their point. I really like the 1910 statement as well, because it has this one sentence that says, that which is demonstrated, we accept with joy. Now, in 1910, which evolutionary mechanisms were known to science? When was Darwin? When was Darwin? When did Darwin publish Origin of Species? 1859. He was born in 1809, 50 years later, published Origin of Species, 1859. So we knew about natural selection. Did we know about mutation? Not in the sense of DNA mutating, because we didn't know about DNA, but we did know that there were like these variants. They didn't call them mutants. Did we know about genetic drift? Not really. This was barely starting to become something. Did we know about gene flow? No. Right? So we didn't know about a lot of this stuff. And I always argue that now we know, it's been demonstrated, so we should just be accepting every time this has happened. And so, shameless plug, I have a YouTube channel called Accept Truth with Joy, where I interview scientists and I make my own little videos about different aspects of where we should be accepting truth, because it's been demonstrated. Okay, so if you want to, feel free to follow. In 2016, the church published an article in the New Era. Now, I don't know that the New Era is that, I don't know, is that better or worse than other magazines? I don't know. But they basically said this, that the position of this is that it's a matter of scientific study. We don't have a position. So you were correct. It's kind of like they really don't have a position on this. Now, again, I don't know if that means it's absolute doctrine because it was the New Era. I don't know. More recently, this year, in conjunction with the History of Saints, Volume 3, they created a church history topics essay called Organic Evolution. I invite you to go read it. It doesn't really say much. It basically just summarizes some of the things I've been saying, and then at the end it says we don't have a position. So the position of the church is there is no position. And I'll just remind you, I'll remind you that this is restated at the BYU museum as well. In fact, last year they put on display an original 1859 original first edition version of the Origin of Species at the BYU Museum. Okay, so they're not anti-Darwin either. There's that same hominid evolution. If you go on the backside, they have skeletal comparisons of the different hominin species. So BYU is not averse to human evolution. They teach it. They basically want everyone to know about it, and they want everyone to know about the best science that supports it. They're down in the life science building, and I don't have an updated version of this, but I think now they have all of the different skulls in this rotating cabinet, where half of it is the actual copy of the real skull, and the other side is like the artistic recreation of what that might have looked like. It's really kind of cool. And this is not BYU, this is University of Utah. But I'm just pointing out that BYU is no different. BYU tries to do things just like every other university and show the history of evolution, okay? So my last additional thoughts, and then it's going to be question and answer, okay? It is okay to have some disagreement and to have conflict. And in some ways, we kind of just have to be patient. We don't know everything in science, and we don't know everything in religion. And so it's okay if there's some disagreement. I mean, heck, if I didn't like disagreement, I couldn't be a phylogeneticist, right, Carl? I mean, there's disagreement in all of the different genes that we use to reconstruct an evolutionary tree. There's tons of disagreement. So disagreement and noise is part of the game. We live on a planet that is messy. It's messy with wonderful biology. So sit down and buckle up, because there's going to be a lot of disagreement over your life. A lot of things that seem not in agreement. Number two, and I've said this already, but we need more humility. We need more humility in science, and we need more humility in religion. And then when we're going to make decisions, especially decisions that are going to affect the lives of other people, we should make decisions based on evidence, not based on gut feelings. We tend to hurt people when we make decisions based on feelings instead of based on evidence. So I think we should always make decisions based on evidence. I think scientists have done a poor job at communicating to the religious, I think and just the community at large. And this is why one of the reasons I do this talk, because I'm trying to reach people so that they can hear from a scientist who believes in God and who believes in the atonement and things like this. I just think we can do a better job at communicating. And I'll also mention this. A lot of times I hear this anti-Darwin trope all the time, and it's like, we've learned a lot about evolution since Charles Darwin. Like, even though I love Charles Darwin, we've learned a lot about evolution. And when I hear Darwinian evolution and all this, I'm like, that's silly. Evolution is ongoing, and we're still learning every year more and more. In fact, the Nobel Prize this year was given to an evolutionary biologist who was able to sequence the genomes of Neanderthals and other hominins and compare those with our genome and figure out some of the relationships here and figure out some of the genes that we share with Neanderthals. That is awesome. And Darwin didn't know anything about that, but it's new evolution. It's new things that we're thinking of and learning about. So we've learned a lot about evolution since Darwin. And finally, that which has been demonstrated, we should just get over it and accept it with joy. There's no reason to continue to think the earth is flat. There's been enough evidence to demonstrate the earth is not flat. Get over it. And I would say the same thing to anyone who's like, I just don't know about evolution. I'd be like, there's enough evidence. If you don't believe me, come take my class or come sit down with me and we'll go through it. There's enough evidence. It's been demonstrated. We should accept it and move on with joy. All right. That's my introduction. So now it's up to you guys to provide questions and then we'll just discuss. Yes?
I think for me, my next question is, how do you think of with the apathy?
Well, I was not expecting that question. Just kidding. That's usually the first question. Yeah, so let's do Adam and Eve, because this is usually the first question. So we know from science, it's been demonstrated, that Homo sapiens evolved at least by 200,000 years ago. This is now probably more like 300,000 years ago. But for our argument's sake today, let's say for sure by 200,000 years ago, we have the species Homo sapien, exactly anatomically, mentally as we are today, okay? Same species as us. We know that that species lived only in Africa for the first at least 100,000 years, and then maybe about 80,000 years ago started to leave Africa. This is Homo sapiens. I'm not talking about Neanderthals or Erectus. They left Africa earlier. I'm talking about our species, okay? We know that they went through a bottleneck at about 100,000 years ago where the individuals were down to a very small population, perhaps right around 10,000 individuals or so, okay? And we know that then they left Africa and went into the rest of the world. And by this point, they were really good at being a social species. They were really good at communicating. They were really good at getting rid of other hominins that existed on the planet and other things, and basically taking advantage of resources. They were really good at that. Okay. So here's just a graph showing, again, we started down here in Africa, we went out of Africa. When they came out of Africa, they found Homo neanderthalensis up in Europe and in parts of Eastern or Western Asia. And there was a little bit of hanky-panky that went on. All of us in this room have a little bit of Neanderthal DNA inside of us. All of us. Every single one of us. There's not one of you in here that is not part Neanderthal. Congratulations. Okay. There are people on this planet that do not have Neanderthal DNA in them, but they are from a very specific part of Africa and they have not interbred with other outside populations. Okay. They also encountered Homo erectus most likely. They also encountered other species most likely, like maybe Homo floresiensis and others as well. But they eventually went into all of the world. And now we're the only Homo species that's still alive. Okay, 50,000 years ago, there were like 6 species of the genus Homo, and now there's only one, just us, just Homo sapiens. Okay, so that's what science knows, all right? Oh, and this species has now grown into more than 7 billion individuals alive on the planet today, okay? Adam and Eve. It is okay to accept, I think, the doctrines that say Adam and Eve were the first man and woman. Adam is the primal parent of our race. But if you're going to do that, you have to make it coincide. You can't just ignore all of the data that science has. You can't just ignore all of that. You have to make it somehow reconcile and coincide with that. How can you do that? One way is to just assume that Adam and Eve were part of this grand population down here at 6,000 years ago, and they were somehow plucked out of that population and were taught the gospel and, you know, started that religion, if you want to do that. I mean, that's one way to do it. You also could put them way back at the very beginning with the original Homo sapien population that was there, and then they would be among kind of the first, and they would be like the, you know, they were part of this original population. You could do that, I guess, but you could also put them anywhere along this timeline. I don't care. You could put them at the bottleneck event. I don't care. It really doesn't matter to me. Okay? You could put them anywhere along here. I just think that you have to do, if you're going to accept that Adam and Eve are real people, and you don't have to even believe in that. In our church, there's enough umbrella room, in my mind, others may argue with this, but I think there's enough umbrella room in our church to even believe in an Adam and Eve that are just symbolic. And that's how pretty much the Catholic Church thinks of them right now anyway, by the way. Most churches actually think of Adam and Eve. Well, most churches that have really thought about this, that's kind of their position. And so if you want to just keep Adam and Eve as a myth and as a story that was important or whatever, you know, I'm not a scriptorian. You can get into all of the, how do you interpret scripture and all of that? I don't know how to do that, okay? So I'm a scientist. I study insects. But I think that's fine. If you want to take that position, that's completely okay. But if you want to accept them as real people, okay, then I think this is one way that you can do this. You say, all right, they are the first man, they're the primal parents, if what you mean by man or primal parent are these 3 ingredients. Homo sapiens physical body, because then it can be anywhere along that 200,000 year period. Inside that Homo sapiens physical body is a spiritual body that is a literal offspring of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother in spirit, right? And I think most of us agree with that. That's why we say, I am a child of God, right? It's not because God is your parent, it's because God is the parent of your spirit, right? The physical body for sure came through evolution. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around that. We know that. That's where our physical bodies came from. But the spiritual body, if you want to, you can believe that that came from Adam or from Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. And then number 3, this is the one that I add on. It's kind of my thing, is I say, and they were the first ones to make gospel covenants and learn about the gospel essentially, and then go and teach it to others. That's what made them the first. It wasn't that they were the first man and woman, meaning Homo sapien. No, they were probably just one of many Homo sapiens that were already there. They were just the first ones to make covenants, learn about the gospel, and then go teach others about it. And that's how I think you can justify calling them the first. Now, of course, I'm doing mental gymnastics with the word first man and mental gymnastics with the word primal parent. But we all do mental gymnastics with scriptures. If you don't think so, I can point out tons of scriptures that I would say, oh, you think that's literally true? And you'll go, oh, well, no, it's not literal. I mean, that's not what they meant. Okay. Who asked this question? I forgot. Was it you? Okay. Does that address at all what you were trying to ask?
Yes.
Is there anything else you want to add on to your question now?
I don't think there's
Yeah, sometimes there are not, the answer is, I don't know, or I need to sit with that. I like how you said that. I've had to sit with a lot of things over my career, and I'm still sitting with some things. There's just things that doesn't make sense to me and I don't like, and it doesn't sit well with me. Polygamy is one of those, for example, right? It just doesn't sit well with me. I don't like it. think it's wrong, I think it's terrible, and we never should have done it. But I'm just gonna kind of sit on it, I guess, for a while. So it's okay to do that. Yeah, Eli.
So how did you come to this view of Adam and Eve with evolution of humans? Like, was it from hearing other people's opinions, or did you come up with this with your knowledge of the scriptures and your knowledge of evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I was convinced of everything on the left side because of studying evolution and teaching evolution, right? I mean, I've thought a lot about how does this do. I teach human evolution every semester, so I'm always trying to be updated too on what the current knowledge state is around this. And I'm utterly convinced that the physical body of all of us, and if Adam and Eve were real, and Adam and Eve are part of the rest of the great tree of life, there's not a separate entity creation that happened for their physical bodies. So I came to that conclusion first, okay? And then I'm like, all right, if that's true, and I still want to believe that Adam is Michael and Eve is that, if I want to believe that, then how can I do that? Based on these authoritative statements that were given. Because those quotes there are from those Byu Evolution Packet. Like those are, as far as we can tell, that's the most official position. So if those are true, it can't mean that they were the first man and woman, meaning like most people think, like they were the very first two Homo sapiens. It can't mean that, right? So if it's not that, then what is it? And that's where I kind of went, well, it has to include the spiritual offspring. And the nice thing about that is then that way all of the important stuff is our relationship to God through the Spirit, not through the physical. The physical doesn't matter, right? And then the last part is, how do I make them be the first? Well, they were the first ones to make covenants. And if you go to the temple, right, I mean, that's pretty much what it's saying. Okay, we're going to teach you a way of living your life that's covenant making. And Adam and Eve were the first ones to do that. So that's kind of how I came to that conclusion. Eventually, yeah.
Where was the fall?
I don't know. The fall could, as I say in there, time in the Garden of Eden is unknown. I mean, potentially they could have been plucked out of that bigger population, placed in an area in the world, the Garden of Eden, wherever that was, and that could have had maybe some mystical properties, some special properties to it. It was different from what was happening in the rest of the world. And maybe they were there for 100,000 years or 200,000 years, or maybe they were there for 1 year. In the end, it doesn't matter. What we do know is that the scriptures say they were created in the garden or outside the garden? Outside the garden, then they were placed in the garden. Right? I mean, a lot of people forget that little detail. They were created outside the garden and then placed in the garden. So it makes sense to me that they're just part of this other thing, and then they were drawn out of that and then taught the gospel and have that spiritual experience and maybe start making covenants, and then their job was to go teach others that same knowledge. Yeah.
Well, yeah, in Galatians or far west.
Yeah. I don't believe that. I think that's ridiculous. It's just one of those that if you actually take that literally and seriously, then you've got a long journey to get that family back over to Jerusalem, area or whatever. Right?
Well, I was growing up in the church, I remember things, but also biology. One thing that's always kind of in my head was everything was created in 5 days or 6 days, and the 7th day was rest. And in the both evolution, not all these mutations, evolution takes place in 6 days, I would believe.
You're correct.
So how would you go about reconciling that?
Luckily, the church has actually softened its position on the age of the earth quite a lot. In fact, President Nelson talked about creative periods instead of days. Like, they use the word day. And again, this is script. I'm not going to go in and talk about the different meanings that Hebrew and Greek and all this could have with day. It's just impossible that it could have been a 6-day period. Obviously, this is just a story to try to teach us about the importance of creation and how we should treat each other and things like that, right? So I don't think you should ever read any of that part of the scriptures as like literal, right? Like that doesn't make sense. It's like if you're going to try to teach a huge story to a broad group of people, both young and old and from different, you know, you're probably going to have to provide some kind of a story that's pretty simple. But again, who cares? Maybe they got it wrong. Maybe that whole story is wrong. It doesn't matter. In my worldview, I'm just interested in accepting truth, right? So I don't care whether the truth comes through science or whether it comes through the prophet. I don't care. I just want truth, right? And I'm okay if people were wrong, and I'm okay if science was wrong. Right?
So, we believe all the scripture. What do you consider that's like something that happened? Like, let's say.
So I believe, and this is the other thing, I'm very careful with my language. I don't use the word, like in science, I try not to use the word believe. I don't know if you guys have noticed this in my classes, but I don't say, I believe that this is the best answer. I always use, the best answer is supported by this data, you know, things like that. In religion, I try to use the word believe on purpose as well. I believe that Christ lived, I believe that he died, and I believe that he resurrected. So that's a historical thing that I believe that happened. I believe that God the Father and the Sons appeared to Joseph Smith. But that's something I believe. I have no scientific evidence to support that belief. And I don't really want to have scientific evidence. That for me is just my own belief. It's a belief that I have. And my evidence for that belief are spiritual feelings that I've had over the years, which I don't expect anyone else to accept or anyone else to, you know, have to change their minds because of what I feel inside my heart. Okay? Yeah. Go ahead and then I'll come to you.
Is there any evidence of like, giants?
No. I mean, Andre the Giant, is that who you're talking about? Bigger than Andre the Giant and some of the few others that had like runaway pituitary gland type stuff? No. There's no evidence of like, you know, 20-foot high people. No. We have no fossil evidence. We have no evidence for that whatsoever. So once again, you can believe in that if you want. Like, but just say, I believe in that. I believe that word. Okay, fine. No one can, you know, disparage your belief. But to say that there were giants on Earth and that they existed for sure, there's no evidence to support that whatsoever. Yeah.
But again, as you said, like Andre the Giant, pituitary glands, like the Bible never says how, except for the one case, it never says how tall
Right.
these giants are. And for people that are probably malnourished and not getting to their full genetic possibility of height, someone who did.
Right. And now we're back to the mental gymnastics. Like, well, how did you interpret that scripture? How do you know, maybe for them it didn't mean this height or whatever.
I don't even think that's mental gymnastics. I just think that the scripture is vague on that point.
Right.
It says
yeah.
giant, and what does that mean?
Right. What does that mean? Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
It might have gone with Ernie's question about like, yeah, how do you determine which things in the scriptures were actual events?
Kind of like this is the model that I would use. If there is enough stuff, evidence, that has demonstrated a particular point of view, then I think that the religion needs to accommodate that truth that's been demonstrated in science. Okay? If science has not been able to say something, like science can't say anything about Christ resurrected. There's no scientific experiment or data that we would go to find to actually prove or disprove that point. So that's something you can believe in, and if you want to believe in it, great, go ahead and believe in it. But my model for if you find something in the Bible, or in the Book of Mormon, or any scripture, or a talk by a general authority, and they say something that is testable, right? And are you a student in my class? No. Yeah, so, you know, we went through that whole exercise of what's testable, you know, the 5 claims and all of that. If you find something that's testable in a religious text, by science, then go ahead and apply it. What does science say about it? And then you'll be able to go, oh, that person is aligned with the scientific consensus or not aligned with the scientific consensus? Yeah.
So I hope I formulate this thought well. But I guess I'm wondering, last we talked about how no form of evolution is higher, better than other, right?
Mhm.
So I guess I'm just thinking about the church's position on how the spirits of the God's children, I guess, are placed in the. So where exactly would that begin? The church also doesn't believe that, like, or anything are the children of God, right? So I guess where is that line? Where does that happen?
The church doesn't have an official position on it. I personally think that because Adam and Eve if Adam and Eve were real, right, they're along here somewhere, I personally think all of the Homo sapiens probably had spiritual offspring of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother inside. But just as we do vicarious work for the dead, right, and they can become part of the family of Adam or the family of Abraham, right, I see no reason that we couldn't also somehow do something vicariously so that any Homo sapien that has ever existed that had a spiritual offspring of deity inside of them could not also be adopted into the family of Adam. Like, I don't see why that couldn't be the case. But the short answer is we don't know. We don't know. Yeah. But that kind of, what I do like about it is it's kind of like, well, what makes us so special? Why are we different and more special than a chimpanzee? Well, from a biology standpoint, we're not. We've both been evolving for the same amount of time. We're both equally evolved, right? Like same with a bacteria or a sea urchin or whatever. But from a religious standpoint, you can at least say, well, we're special because we have God's offspring inside of our bodies. And that makes us special. And we can have relationships with God. We can have relationships with each other that are powerful and can be eternal. Keep going. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you think, I guess, evolution like a resurrected body has like different characteristics than a birth body? But it seems like most changes that happen through evolution outward changing.
I don't know, okay, but I will say that the people who have seen resurrected beings that have testified of that, right, see them as just normal human Homo sapiens, right? I mean, they're glorified and, you know, brilliant and things like that, but they're in the form of a Homo sapien. So it's probably just a Homo sapien. It's probably similar to the form that you have now will be the resurrected being. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. That's one of those bigger thought questions that I'm just sitting on. I don't know. We'll learn that maybe at some celestial Bio 1010 class in the future. Were Adam and Eve black? It depends on where they lived. If they lived anywhere before the bottleneck, they were for sure black, which would be great if the church would do an Adam and Eve video in the temple with black actors instead of white actors. But, yeah. But if they lived after that and in an area of the world that went through that lightening of the skin because of the natural selection that was happening, then they could have been more white. But if they came from an area of the world where we think that where most of the world thinks the Garden of Eden was, or where that people lived, they were probably at least brown, right? Not white, probably brown. But again, color of the skin really doesn't matter. We're all the same species. Any other questions? Well, at least we answered the first question in the order in which I thought it would come. So. Yeah.
You have to stand in one side. You have religion here. You have science. Which side that you like can be stand up. Because like religion is based on belief. Science, proof, stuff. Which side are you like will take? Because
I stand on both sides
why?
because I accept truth no matter where it comes from. I don't.
What do you believe?
What?
Like Christ and God believe.
Yeah.
That comes from religion. Not religion. We have a belief. Religion is stand with
Right.
science. Always about
Right.
science.
Right.
So why are you standing?
Because that's who I am. I believe that I should, I believe when, I don't know if you were here at the beginning when I talked, but that's my first core principle, is that I think I should accept truth and knowledge no matter where it comes from. I've stood in front of paintings and I've listened to a singer sing God on High from Les Mis, and I've received insight and knowledge in those occasions. So I believe you can actually get knowledge not just from science or religion. I think you can get knowledge from science, religion, art, music. I think there's lots of ways to gain insights into your worldview. Now, the great thing about science is that it's really powerful. If it's a question or an issue that can be addressed by science, science is very powerful, like the origin of the physical body of Homo sapiens. Science has addressed that and answered that question for us. It came about through evolution. Science cannot address where did the spirit, or is there a spirit on the inside of the body come from? That's something that science can't address. And science doesn't try to address covenants between Homo sapiens and deity either. So that's a religious issue. So that's why I stand on both places. Right? You don't have to. I have tons of awesome colleagues that are completely irreligious. They're agnostic or atheist, and they're wonderful people, and they're great, and I would trust my life with them because they are awesome. They're some of my best friends. And I'm completely fine with someone who just stands in science, and that's fine. I just have chosen to gain knowledge in all ways in my life, not just science. Any others? Noah. Was that one of my, oh, death before the fall, old earth. Those are some of the questions that come up. So Noah, I would not take the story of Noah literally from the scriptures because the scientific evidence does not support a global flood at all, especially one that would have happened less than 6,000 years ago. Science does not support that at all. So again, that's one of these situations where you have to go, the science is addressing that, can address that point of the biological diversity that exists on planet Earth today. One hypothesis is evolution did it over millions and millions and millions of years. The other hypothesis is the entire terrestrial biodiversity was placed on a boat not too many years ago and came off that boat and made all of the terrestrial biodiversity that exists today and freshwater biodiversity. No. Like that is just impossible. So, but it doesn't mean there's not value in the story of Noah. I mean, there's value in knowing that God loves us and he'll give us a second chance or something. I don't know, whatever point you want to take out of that story. But I do not take the story of Noah and the global flood literally. And then you could go, well, maybe there was a localized flood and that's what Noah thought he saw and, you know, that's the story that he told. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, you can do all of that kind of other scriptorian kind of thinking later, but the science is clear. There was not an entire global flood 6,000 years ago or whatever. That just is not supported by the evidence. Does that make sense? Any other questions on that one? There's this Mormon belief that was adopted by Joseph Fielding Smith because it was a position that another creationist fundamentalist had. Joseph Fielding Smith adopted it and then wrote about it and published it in many of his books and articles. And the idea that there was no death ever before the fall of Adam and Eve. And that's just also not true. I mean, it's not true for sure of just death in general, of cells and of living organisms, but it's probably for sure not true also of Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, like I said, Adam and Eve probably, if they were real, lived somewhere else along this column of the population of Homo sapiens, and so there were Homo sapiens dying as well.
Yeah, another question. What do you think about like the age?
Oh, how they lived for that long? There's no evidence to support that either, that they lived for long periods of time. So again, it's back to, well, are we misinterpreting the age, or is the original Hebrew written in a way that we didn't understand? I don't know. I don't do that kind of philosophizing. I'm not a theologian, I'm not a scriptorian, I don't read ancient languages. I just know that there's no evidence from science that supports people living that long. In fact, if anything, their average lifespan was way shorter than what ours is today. But you might see a theme, like if science has demonstrated something, I accept it. Even if it contradicts a deeply held religious doctrine or view, right? Like I don't care, I just let it override it. That, for me, does not lessen, though, my love for God and for my family. I don't love God less because I think that people didn't live to 900 years. Like, that doesn't affect my love of God or my love of other people. I still think I should treat other people well. Any other questions? Yeah.
So is the earth a collage of other worlds?
So that's another same kind of Joseph Fielding Smith one that he borrowed from another person, brought it into Mormonism, and then expanded that view. And a lot of people thought that that should be the doctrine because it was in his books and articles. And so lots of members of the church, especially like my generation and a little bit older, like we grew up with this in seminary and institute. Like this was literally taught to us. Like that's how we explain the earth. And it's just ridiculous. There's no evidence for it. I mean, yeah, the earth came from materials in the universe and came together, but not as a collage of like broken pieces. Because they try to explain like fossils of dinosaurs and things like that. And they're like, well, it's because those lived on a different planet that then broke apart and then came over here. That's ridiculous. I mean, planet Earth was molten multiple times until it eventually cooled and then became Earth. So even if there were pieces of a fossil from some other asteroid, it was completely vaporized and molten, and so it wouldn't have survived that. You're laughing. I love it. But right, but again, it's kind of one of these things where we laugh about it, but we need to remember, like these are. I mean, I really had some dark days when I started learning about evolution because I was a creationist and I believed these things. I literally thought that was for sure the doctrine of the church. So at the same time, we need to be patient with our parents and grandparents because it's hard for them to overcome some of these thoughts and doctrines that they thought were real or true. It's hard. I mean, we can laugh on the side, but we have to show empathy and love as well. Otherwise, I mean, my parents have now finally come around to this, but it took me lots and lots of kind of sit down talks with them with lots of love and being like, well, no, Mom, that's not quite how it happens. And now they agree and they understand that this is the way that the earth was created and things like that. So it takes time, but people can be drawn to the position that they should accept truth no matter where it comes from. Back to my first principle. If we can just convince everyone of that, this whole thing will be a lot easier. Any other questions? Yeah. The best consensus is that this is a biological reality. That gender attraction is a continuum. It's a large spectrum, and it's a biological reality, not a choice. And the church has pretty much come to that. If you go to their website, they pretty much now say it's okay to be Mormon and gay, right? Like that's okay. To be gay, they don't want people breaking the law of chastity and other things like that, but they basically say it's okay to be gay and be a member of the church. But from a biological standpoint, it is a reality. I've looked at this in pretty good detail, and it is a biological reality. And also, there's a spectrum of sex. There's not just a bimodal male sex and female sex. There is intersex, and there's a bunch of different pathways that a Homo sapien can arrive at either male or female or something in between. There's a lot of variation there as well. So gender attraction, and sex all have a basis in biology. It's a real phenomena that exists on planet Earth. It's part of our biology. And so it's complicated because the church for many, many years has dealt more with a bimodal situation where they've tried to deal with only males and females or only women and men, right? And so it's complicated for them right now, and only attraction, cisgender attraction. And so it's complicated for the church right now as they're trying to move forward through this. I wish them the best of luck, and I wish they would accept truth and science, the best science that we have on these things, so that they can move forward with love and mercy. Did that answer your question, Ernie?
Yeah. I struggle to wrap my head around how, God would, or somehow, he has his hands over our physical bodies, right? Why, like that attraction as a threat to family, as stated.
And that kind of falls into my second principle. I don't think God's a deceiver. I think God is okay with the way He's allowed this world to be created. I think He's okay with that. And so I think the church has some growing to do there. But again, it's not my job to tell the prophet, what he has to do in the church. I can give my best advice of what the science says, and the science is really clear on this, or is pretty clear on this, and I hope they listen, and I hope that they grow. There, and then I'll come back to you. Yeah. It was tough. It happened for me. It began after I got married, and I moved to Chile, and I was doing my master's degree, and now I'm the only member of the church in the entire building, right? And all of my fellow graduate students and all of my professors are not members of the church, and I just came from BYU where everyone was, right? And the minority were a few grad students that weren't LDS. And now I'm in the minority, and I started having interactions where people were like, how can you believe in someone who had, Joe Smith, who had 27 wives? I had never heard that before. I'm like I'm 23 years old, and I did not know that Joe Smith had more than one wife. I thought Emma was the only one. I mean, that's unheard of for your generation. You guys know about this stuff because the internet exists. I didn't know. And so it turns out that the science stuff was much easier for me because I was studying science, and I just loved science, and it was like, and I had the Byu Evolution Packet by that point, right? And so I was able to work through the science conflict quite seamlessly, actually. It took a while, but it came without much darkness. The other darkness was actually the other stuff I was learning about the church, the historical problems and things like that. That was where I had real dark, and because I couldn't talk about it with my wife, I didn't have the confidence to talk to her about it. I do now, but at the time I had no confidence, and so I was completely alone in Chile trying to figure all this out on my own. Luckily, there's the internet, and so I found a few groups of kind of like progressive LDS groups that were talking and thinking about these things, and I found these groups, and they were a lifesaver for me. And then I started reading and devouring everything by LDS thinkers like Carol Gibbons and others who really helped me kind of move my faith into like a different path, a different step in my faith, right? Does that address your question?
So
I don't know. Because it depends on how you define self-aware, right? But for sure, by the species Homo sapien, for sure. But our best guess is if we look at what other Homo species were doing, like Homo neanderthalensis and so forth, they were pretty self-aware too. So that pushes it back to about maybe 700,000 years ago. But then you're like, well, but even Homo erectus did things that were pretty self-aware. Well, that pushes it back now to 1.5 million years ago, right? So I don't know, but it's definitely longer than the species Homo sapien. Okay. Speech was another really important thing, right? Not just being self-aware, but being able to communicate in a very complicated way with other members of your own species, and not just with smells and elaborate displays and a few calls here and there, and, you know, some facial expression. But having speech was a really important evolutionary thing as well that brought Homo sapiens further forward as well. We don't know when that happened. Probably, we think we have good indications that Homo neanderthalensis had probably speech. So that's probably at least 700,000 years ago again. Does that answer your question? Yeah, a change in diet was important, but there's a bunch of other things that were really important as well that led to us. And that's a fascinating subject, and there's still lots to be known on that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Have things been recorded?
Yeah, oh, I'm streaming and I don't know if it got automatically recorded or not. But I've recorded versions of this in the past if you want to watch past versions. Or like I said, I have my YouTube channel where I repeat a lot of this and I go into more detail on certain things. And then I interview a bunch of other believing LDS scientists on how they do stuff too. So there's enough out there. If you send me an email if you can't find the channel, but it's Accept Truth with Joy. If you search that on YouTube, you'll find it. Yeah.
Were you saying that
I don't know. What I do know is that the proclamation's never been canonized. So it's at least one step lower than, you know, scriptures and things like that. I personally think that there's probably some parts of that were written in a way that we're trying to protect the church legally from some stuff and probably shouldn't have been written that way. Or they should have just left that alone. But there's other parts of the proclamation that I really like. But, you know, that's like me doing now my cafeteria style of the LDS church, right? Where I just choose the things that I like. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not okay. But I don't know. We don't know whether spirits are bimodal distributions or whether there's a continuum. But what we do know is that the physical body, the physical Homo sapien body, is a continuum. It's not bimodal. It's not just this or this. There's a distribution that's happening there. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know about celestial reproduction of spirits, right? Like I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it is possible to make only male spirits and female spirits. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. All I know is what I can say, what the science is saying about the physical bodies of Homo sapiens, and it is not black or white. It is not male or just female. There's intersex that exists. And then it's not just woman or man. There is a whole bunch of gender continuum in between as well. So that's what the physical reality is on this earth with this messy biology. And so we have to deal with that. But I always keep saying to myself, God's apparently okay with it, or he would have came down and fixed it all, right? And if it needed fixing, then he would have, and he hasn't. So he must be okay with the physical conditions in which we exist on this planet. That's the way I have to think of it. And so in the meantime, I'm going to love everyone, and I'm going to show mercy to everyone, and I'm going to try to defend those that need to be defended as much as I can. Yeah.
So spirits, scripture says that spirits are eternal. Happen. Spirits are alike. Flesh. Spirit. Where does the genetics?
We don't know. So obviously from a science standpoint, we can't address that question. From a religious standpoint, there's been a lot of conjecture about what that might mean, you know, but I don't know. I mean, I kind of think of it in this way. Again, these are just my own opinions. None of this is the church doctrine, okay? But I kind of feel that God allowed evolution to happen until he got a form of life that was really close to what he needed to carry out his purposes. And as soon as he got that form of life, then he's like, all right, it's now time to start putting our spirits in these things and bringing to pass the eternal life and the immortality and the eternal life of man. Like, and because he's from if we accept the notion that he also came from a creative world somewhere else, right? Then his genetics are not our genetics. His genetics are different, right? And so how does that play into him making Christ? I don't know. Like, I don't know any of that stuff. That's all conjecture. And it's fun to think about it. Like, I like thinking about those things, but those are things that I just kind of think about and sit with because the church has no official position on it and science can't say anything about it. So you can sit with it and think about it and kind of have fun, and then maybe in some celestial class we'll learn about it later. But all I know is that the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that the genetics of our Homo sapien population, the physical bodies, came through the process of evolution. And we have common ancestry with the rest of life. We have common ancestry with the great apes and with the rest of the biological life that exists on planet Earth. Anything else? Well, thanks for sticking around. You guys are like stalwarts for staying. Do you mind if I just finish with a couple slides? I love Henry Eyring. Now this is Elder Eyring's father, Dr. Henry Eyring, who is a chemist. And I just love this. He says, there are few ways in which good people do more harm to those who take them seriously than defend the gospel with arguments that don't hold water. Many of the difficulties encountered by young people going to college would be avoided if parents and teachers were more careful to distinguish between what they know to be true and what they think may be true. Impetuous youth, upon finding the authority it trusts crumbling, even on unimportant details like giants and how long did people live and things like that, is apt to lump everything together and throw the baby out with the bathwater. I am concerned that believing youth come to my biology class and hear me argue vehemently that our physical bodies came about through the process of evolution. And I'm worried that sometimes there might be a student that gets so convinced of that, but then goes, well, but my seminary teacher, but my parents, but my grandparents, well, they all must be wrong, and they must be wrong about everything. And I'm concerned that therefore they throw their entire testimonies and religious beliefs out the window and go. Okay, I'm concerned about that. I am. It's a real concern that I have. However, I'm going to keep teaching science and try to convince people that humans evolved because they did. So I'm going to keep doing it because it's the truth. And I accept the truth even if it hurts sometimes. But I am worried about students losing their faith over things that I teach. But that's why I do this talk, and I wish this would have been full with everyone so that everyone could have heard what I'm saying and what I'm telling you. So I am worried about that. He also said, some have asked me, is there any conflict between science and religion? And he says, well, there's no conflict in the mind of God, but often there's a conflict in the minds of men. A young man said, in high school we are taught such things as pre-Adamic men and what kind of thing and that kind of thing, but we hear another thing in church. What should I do about it? Now, again, this could be any topic that you are having struggles with in your heart. There's probably quite a few. I've had lots of these struggles in my heart over different questions. But I love what he says. I think I gave the right answer. I said, in this church, you only have to believe what's true. So go find out what the truth is. I love that advice. And so go find out what the truth is. That's why you're here at the university. And you have also if you're a believer, you have the ability to also go and get on your knees, and you have the ability to go read scripture and listen to talks and stuff and find truth that way. Because I think you can find truth that way as well. If I didn't, I would not still be doing what I do as a bishop and as a father in my family and things. I'd probably lead a very different life. But I do believe, but I also accept truth no matter where it comes from. And that's how I live my life. So that's the end of my talk. Yay. Any other last minute questions or anything that someone, if you're welcome and you didn't feel comfortable saying it in front of everyone, I'll turn off the recording or the screen. You can just come up later. I'll stick around if anyone wants to ask any more questions, okay? All right, thanks.